really excited for this next session. Nadia, are you excited? Nervous?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think this is going to be my favorite part of the day. Sorry, other thoughts.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I am definitely a little bit jealous that you get to moderate such an amazing panel with some really stellar folks here. So I will stop talking and let you go ahead with it. Really excited for this session.
Thank you, Preet. Thanks. So coming back to the topic of the panel discussion, as I said, I'm really looking forward to sharing some of the tips and some of the situations that maybe some of our panelists have been experiencing. Today, with the COVID-19 rapidly impacting the world, the interest towards remote working is taking a swift turn. Everywhere across the globe, companies are forced to close the offices for their doors and to move to the remote collaboration and to the remote work. According to some of the data on the internet that I was researching before before this panel, the remote work have been increasing 60% by only March 20. So right now it's probably even more. So there is a huge load on the technical aspect of the side. There is a huge load on the emotional side of the aspect, on the organization way of working. So there is a lot of changing happening around. And of course, we would like to discuss how to deal with some of those things, how to better approach these swift changes in our lives. And for that, we have an amazing four panelists invited today to share with us this conversation. And I would like to introduce them. So first, I would like to announce Jessa Parette, the head of UX for Associate Digital Experience at Walmart. I think many people know Walmart. It's an American multinational retail company that operates a big chain of hypermarkets and different department stores, grocery stores, etc. Jessa is a design leader who drives high impact goals through empowering user-centered design. Jessa's background is in the product design, user experience research, and scaling complex design and research teams in organizations. As a lead of UX for Associate Digital Experience at Walmart, Jessa leads the research and design for internal applications and products for Walmart's 1.2 million associates. That's a lot of work, I can imagine. Jessa is managing people remotely and also distributed teams for 3 years right now. This is why I think there is a lot of knowledge today to share. So welcome, Jessa.
Thanks.
Excited to have you. The next speaker I would like to introduce, the next panelist I would like to introduce is Eismann. And Eden is the Vice President of Design at Slack, which we all know, which every participant is using today during the remote design sprint. So during the remote design week. So of course, everyone should be familiar with the product. Ethan is leading teams to deliver an outstanding product experience at Slack, and he's focused on making the best product, the best platforms, a platform for the teams to work and collaborate better together. While Slack being, I think, from my experience, is being one of the most often used tools in all remote organization, Slack had to switch to the full remote collaboration due to the COVID-19 situation. And today I'm excited for Ethan to share some of those practices, how that's a change went for Slack with us. So welcome,
Great.
Ethan.
Thanks, Nadia. Happy to be here.
The next panelist I'm excited to announce is Olusoga. I hope I pronounce the surname.
Great job.
Yay. Ola is a director of product experience at Automattic. And I'm sure everyone who is listening to us knows Automattic because this is the company behind the WordPress, the popular content management system and the site builder that's actually behind so many websites on the internet today. Ola is a creative problem solver, and he spends a majority of the time at the intersection of the design, business, and strategy. Automattic is the distributed company. Employees work largely from home or in co-located offices in 43 countries, if I'm not mistaken. And I think the company mostly relies on the internal blogging platform for communication and collaboration. So a lot of experience here about the remote collaboration, remote communication, and how to kind of like maybe avoid the emails and all of that stuff. I think that's going to be really exciting to discuss today. Welcome, Ola. Nice to have you as well. I think you're muted though.
Oh, so thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome. And last but definitely not least, I'm really excited to announce Jenny Mann. Jenny is the product designer at Figma. And hey, we had an amazing workshop from Figma today. So I think the company, organization, and the product does not need the introduction anymore. We had a lot of fun. So Jenny is located in San Francisco, and where the most of the Figma team is located. I know that some of the other employees are also working from European countries. So some of the distributed people are also present. So I'm excited to have Jenny today because she is going to share with us some of the experience of Figma on the transition to all remote during the times of the COVID, and how the remote work is changing the way that Figma thinks about the product design, upcoming releases, and the whole nice story about any challenges that maybe they have overcome. Welcome, Jenny. Nice to have you here as well.
Thanks, Nadia. I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. And short two words about myself. I'm really relating to this discussion because I'm a product design manager at Gitlab. Gitlab is a full all remote organization. We don't have a single office anywhere in the world. And we are experiencing a lot of the remote collaboration ourselves. So I hope we're going to have a really nice discussion around that today. And to kick off this talk and maybe exchange some of the thoughts first, I would like to invite every of the participants to share the current setup of your organization in regards to the remote work or the change that you had to take in the operations in the last few weeks due to the situation. Ola, would you like to go first?
How Automattic has adapted internally in terms of just collaborating. Not much. Not in terms of process and the day-to-day work, just how we collaborate. Not much has changed just because we are distributed by nature or just work remotely all the time. So process hasn't changed much. I think the biggest thing is just making sure folks are okay, right? Letting folks know that it's all right to step away from your computer. It's all right to take time off and really just be present with family at this time. That's probably the biggest thing that has changed.
Exactly, because I can imagine that people are also having impact in other areas, so that has a little bit of the effect on the work. Jessa, what about Walmart?
Yeah, so I'm speaking on behalf of myself in this instance, but I've been leading remote and distributed teams for quite a while, leading a team in Bentonville, Arkansas, which is where our headquarters are, here in Austin, where I'm located, and then in India. So I think the largest change is in helping the team adjust to what does collaboration mean for them. And thankfully, we were very familiar with how to work and over communicate. But I think the largest adjustment has been recognizing the sense of isolation, recognizing that psychological safety looks different, and over communication now means something different. And really stressing some of the skills that we've harnessed, like running design sprints entirely virtually, or running entire research methodologies virtually. I think those have been some of the challenges. So thankfully, I have an amazing team and they've been very resilient. But as a leader, that's one of the things I've experienced specifically related to COVID.
Yeah, I think a lot of those will also be familiar to Jenny. Probably like how do you, yeah, like over communication and the similar things. Jenny, how does that all?
Yeah.
How,
Yeah, I think a lot of that resonates. I think for us as a company at Figma, operationally, I think it was a pretty smooth transition because I think we've already like been relying on a bunch of like first-class cloud tools, and we also just like use our own product, Figma, a lot. So when it comes to actually like working together on like a product spec or working together on a design, the way that we're working together operationally isn't that different. But what the main impact has been, I think, has been like very emotional, and I think it's been different for everybody at the company how they've experienced this period of time. But I think also a big difference has been in like the size and scale of Figma as it is right now. One of the most special things about working at Figma has been like being in an office with like 150 people and sort of knowing everybody, and a lot of the sort of spontaneous interactions that come out of working with such a tight knit group of people. We just like don't have that anymore, and it's really hard to keep a check on like, hey, how are people doing, and like, hey, how can I best help you with your with the project that you're working on. Those are a lot of the things that we're trying to still work on, like building within the way that we're working remotely.
right, Ethan, does it sound also familiar to Slack?
Yeah, to a great degree. I mean, Slack is, we're over 2,000 people, so not a massive company like, Walmart, and not sort of a smaller, company like Figma, kind of right in the middle. And we have distributed teams, not remote teams, but we have, teams in Denver and in New York, and in Vancouver. And so I would say that some of the sort of biggest impacts or changes that we've had to focus on at an individual level, as everybody in the company has moved to remote, is really, I'm going to look at this from like more of a design perspective. It's like your home ergonomics. Do you have the right sort of space to work, the right lighting? Do you have the right level of privacy? What are the consequences of, and the costs or the benefits of, if you have a family, your family's right next to you, at all times during the day. So on an individual level, trying to figure out how to make your workspace the most productive it can possibly be and the most sort of like comfortable it can possibly be has been something that we've really focused on. So making sure you have a really like a good setup has been important for individuals. And organizational level, I think, and by the way, on the individual level, there's a lot of sort of deep psychological things that are happening with folks, not just because it's remote, but because of COVID. And so, of course, that is like very, very acknowledged across Slack. And we've been trying to do a really good job of helping people take the time that they need in order to be as healthy as they can. At an org level, what I've seen, interestingly, is that like some teams are becoming even closer because when you have a distributed model, the teams that aren't in San Francisco have felt like they're sort of satellites, and now everybody's remote. And so it's really leveled the playing field. Also, when you see dynamics with introverts and extroverts, if you have those mixes of folks within the same conference room together, oftentimes the extroverts will speak over the introverts. That doesn't happen anymore. And so it's like this really nice even playing field that I think teleconferencing like Zoom and Cisco, WebEx, et cetera, like they really sort of enforce this even playing field in terms of the way people are communicating. Interrupting is really obvious in this environment. And then to Jenny's point, like the way that we've actually worked and the tools that we use have really supported a fairly smooth transition to this remote world. So at Slack, we don't use email, and Slack is really great for really quick turnaround of communication, fostering a sense of like real-time collaboration and community when you're doing work. So we've just kept on doing what we've done, sort of historically. And then of course we use Figma as well, which as a design tool has really helped the teams sort of keep a pace of each other's work in real time.
Right. Yeah, so sounds like there was quite some work and help with adaptation was being done. You've been mentioning like the technical setup, the lighting, the desks, Could you maybe share some of the quick wins with those people who have been forced to move to the all remote collaboration really fast? Like what are kind of like the first things that you need to tackle in order to make yourself and your team comfortable in all of the all remote setup. Ethan, maybe you wanna pick this.
Yeah. So yeah, just to reiterate, like the ergonomic setup is really important. Like make sure you have the right Wi-Fi. I mean, like these seems relatively basic, but like there was that period of time, it took around like 2 to 3 weeks where people were still struggling with like just getting the setup to work. And so that sort of sets the stage for folks across the team being able to work as efficiently as they can. But then I think the other side of this is just like recognizing the how much energy it takes to do remote work, and it's a different type of energy than doing work in an office. And so that's another thing that we immediately started to really focus on is, we've started to, for example, start meetings 5 minutes into the half hour or the hour versus directly on the 30-minute or hour mark, to give people space and time to get up, get some food, take a bio break, walk around. And so just acknowledging those sort of like the dynamics of your day and making room for you to kind of get up even out of your space and use your body. Using your body will help your mind oftentimes feel a bit fresher and freer. And just like sometimes people are now taking walking Zoom calls versus video calls. It's just it's important to kind of mix up your space, because if you're just in the same room, the same spot for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, week after week, that can be a real challenge. So those are sort of two things that we've been really focusing on.
Oh yeah, definitely, especially about changing the exterior, the room, the place where you're located. I think that's definitely really helpful. Ola, maybe from your perspective, you've been working in all remote or distributed setup quite for a long time. What would be some your tips, the most important things that you would advise to somebody to
I think a lot of the things Ethan mentioned, in terms of just taking a break, stepping away from your computer, having just work set up at home, are really important. In terms of just processes, I'm not sure much needs to change. I think what needs to adjust is just adapting it for remote working, right? Fundamentally, the components of things that we do daily for design and just making, right, are still there. It's just figuring out how we can collaborate remotely. So using tools like Zoom for one-on-one, or we're using Zoom to talk right now with ourselves and a whole bunch of folks. So using Zoom, Figma, Slack, just using all these different tools that allow us to collaborate synchronously or asynchronously. And then just in terms of taking breaks, I think that's one of the biggest things that folks kind of need to focus on. Just making sure that you're taking care of just your mental health, right? And knowing boundaries, because one thing that happens with remote working is there's no longer a boundary between office and your home. So you could just go for hours working heads down, and not noticing that time has gone by. So just realizing, that you need to plan work and plan life, making sure that, you're stepping away from your computer again, making sure that you're talking to humans, not just like in real life, not just over a computer, because you can stare at a screen for hours. And just, creating that boundary. I think that's one of the key things to remember. In terms of tools, there are a whole bunch of tools out there that can be tried out to figure out what works for teams, to make sure y'all are talking frequently and just collaborating.
Yeah, I've heard from somebody that a lot of people are starting acquiring new hobbies just to make sure that they're switching off from work. What is your particular way to make sure that you are not sitting too long near your computer?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think for me personally, I go to the gym like 4 times a week. So I usually step away around noon for about an hour and a half to go to the gym. That wasn't enough, so I signed up for a Krav Maga gym because I need more human interaction. So now I go to like a Krav Maga gym where I'm interacting with folks and grappling and stuff like that. And then I think one of the great things that Automattic as an employer provides is a stipend for co-working spaces. So, if folks start embracing remote culture, remote working, and as we go back to normal across the globe, I think employers providing a benefit like that, where folks can step outside their house and go work either at a co-working space or at a coffee shop, right? And make sure you buy a coffee so you're not just using the Wi-Fi for free. And the other great thing that Automattic does is we have meetups yearly, throughout the year, where at a team level, folks can get together anywhere in the world and just work. So we'll have a week where a team can choose to meet up in New York, and we'll just work together, get at hotel rooms and just hang out and get work done. And then once a year, the entire company meets up at a chosen location where we do the same thing. We get together, we talk about the work, we do work, and we just plan for the next year and the rest of the year.
Yeah. This is amazing. I can imagine that that could be super fun. We have also similar practices at Gitlab, so I can really relate to that. Jenny, one of the things that you mentioned is about the over communication, and maybe you can open some cards at how do you approach that? How do you make sure to communicate really well at Figma these days?
Yeah, I think one thing that we learned from transitioning over from like basically non-remote to remote working is that like not everything that works, sort of like the ways that we over communicate in like a real life situation doesn't translate like equally one-to-one to a remote situation. So I think as a company, we were already like really good at over communicating in many ways, at least compared to like other places that I've worked at. And things are just like, you know, whenever a team or something would make decisions, we would post like a pretty like explicit list of those things in a public Slack channel. And we also like organize Slack channels based on like features and teams, and anyone's like allowed to like be in those Slack channels. So we've done that in the past anyway, and those have like translated really, really well into this like new feature. I think when we first went from remote or non-remote to remote, we were like, okay, we have to over communicate even more now. So we started like just creating Zoom meetings for everything, and we had daily stand-ups for basically like everything we were working on. But now we're sort of recognizing like, hey, like we can still, you know, keep track of what we're doing, but we don't need to be like, we don't need to have like these sort of in-person conversations for every decision that gets made. And a lot of the ways that we were over communicating in the past, like through Slack messages and through documentation, those still work pretty robustly in this new feature.
Amazing. So I hope that doesn't mean that you have an overload of the meetings these days.
Yeah, it's definitely getting more chill now.
Yeah, I'd just say boundaries are really important, not just like in life, but just like work, right? Making sure that everything you just mentioned, Jenny.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks so much for sharing that. I would like to pick up one very interesting question from the questions chat. And Jessa, I would like to address that to you. So Andre is asking this. A lot of companies fear that remote work equals wasting time at home. I guess we can all relate to hearing that. So COVID-19 did what nobody else did to bring remote work where it should be. Remote work has the power to reduce traffic, pollution, and improve our lives in many, many ways. How do you think we need to? How do you think we need to do to maintain the remote mindset? Probably, what do we need to do? What do you think, Jessa, as also as a leader of the teams, remote teams?
Yeah, that's a great question, and you're absolutely right. All it took was a global pandemic to push some things into high gear, right? Push a lot of things through. So I think one is, we've gotten this question a lot too, and I've talked to other leaders too. Well, how do you know people are working? How do you track people? You know, are they wasting time? And to me, that's less about the people on your team, and it's more about your management. That's you as a leader, right? I mean, I see Ola laughing. I mean,
Plus one.
Right. It's one of the things that you have to recognize as a leader, whether you're a design leader or research leader, is that the dynamic and the relationship dynamic between you and the people on your team is different, where you have to start from a moment of trust. You have my trust until you break it. You as a leader have to earn their trust. It's flipped. And so I think one of the things that COVID has pushed into the spotlight is the concept of trust in remote work. It has pushed and forced a conversation from a leadership perspective in recognizing that, you know, productivity looks different And it doesn't necessarily mean tracking to, the minute Jira point system. And for me, I have a very, I like to make sure that the work-life balance on my team is the first thing that we recognize. And so for me, I've never had a thought whether or not people are being productive, because I will know when people aren't. Deadlines are missed, work is subpar. The processes you put in place to make work a quality are the things that will tell you whether or not, productivity is slipping. And when it is, the first reaction, I think, when coming from a moment of psychological safety, my encouragement to people out there, approach it from a point of collaboration and curiosity. What's happening, right? If you do see things changing on your team, assume that something unique is happening right now. And to maintain that safety on your team, approach it in the sense of, what is happening in the rest of your life. So Ola, you mentioned, making those boundaries is really important. I absolutely agree. I'm going to speak from the perspective of scale here, right? I work for a little bit of a large company. The diversity of our workforce, the diversity of your teams may mean that some people don't have the luxury of turning off their phone. They have family obligations, kids in the background, pets that need attention. I have a fish tank right here, right? There are things that will dissolve the boundary. And I think one of the things that COVID is changing is the recognition of flexibility from leadership, making sure, hey, you know what, if you can't work from, 9 to 5 because of now, your family obligations are right there in your face, in your living room. Okay, maybe that's okay. Maybe you work different hours and that's all right. But that would be my perspective. Is I think it's changing the concept of trust and the concept of what does quality product look like when you have good processes in place that can handle remote work. I hope that answers the question, but feel free to jump in.
And I'll add to that. Trust is extremely important. That's one of the pillars that we care a lot about at Automattic. So Ethan had touched on just remote working now kind of makes the org a bit flat, right? Folks who are more introverted and folks who are more outspoken kind of have an even playing field where everyone can kind of communicate. So within Automattic, Nadia, you had mentioned, we touched on it. We have an internal communication tool called P2, which is pretty much a group blogging theme that's powered by WordPress. So we use that to talk about everything, right? In terms of planning work, in terms of, setting milestones, just saying, hey, something's happening over here. We also use Slack, Ethan. It's great. And we use that for more, in real time, fast feedback communication, right? While P2 is more, hey, this is there. You can always check it out when you're ready. And the reason I'm sharing that is because there's a lot of visibility on things that are happening across the company. So that means, there's a lot of trust. You can kind of see everything. You can see numbers, you can see this, there are passwords for all the things. And with that trust comes a bit of responsibility, right? We're hoping that folks can self-manage, right? When you come into a remote culture and the keys to the kingdom are given to you, and it's up to you to kind of figure out how to structure your day, when to create boundaries, when to step away, when to go deep. It's all right if you're not working 9 to 5. You can work from 1 to 10 p.m., 1 p.m. to 10 p.m. That's okay. All that really matters is, you're governing yourself and making sure the work is done. That's the bottom line. And if work isn't happening, right, and going back to the question, how can we make sure folks are working? We can't really, right? It's just trust. It all comes down to trust.
It's a great point. And actually, I would like to maybe put a little bit more emphasis on that. Does the way you track the progress change with going to all remote work? Maybe Ethan, I'd like you to step in here.
This is one it's difficult to answer because of the reason why we're doing remote work now. And, so we're all doing remote work now because there's a virus that is impacting people's lives, across the board. And some people are primary caregivers. You know, some people are just like, they're not, but they still have other challenges that are introduced by the general context that we're all in. And so, you know, at Slack, it has, the conversation really hasn't been, interestingly, about remote work per se, but about how to create an environment that is like healthy for people across the board, acknowledging the constraint that a lot of folks are under. So when we're evaluating, you know, productivity at this time, the way that we are really thinking about what it means is individualized oftentimes. And now, if we were to be in a company like Automattic, I think it would probably be sort of a different, you know, well, you have a historic lens on how you've done this, but during this time, you know, it's really hard to separate the two. So one thing though that we as a leadership team have done, and as like the management team and leadership team are really focused on, is understanding what our true capacity is during this time, and acknowledging that when we're doing planning. So that's an important thing when you have those cycles, whether you're doing quarterly planning or, you know, sprint planning, being realistic about what the team can accomplish during that time, and acknowledging that it's likely it's less than they could historically. And also just understanding the needs of individuals in the team and making space for them to be able to do what they need to do to support those around them has been a really important sort of theme for us.
I like that. I like that the change of you know, of a more better understanding what can you do in these times of a change as well. Ola, do you have to add something from the perspective of Automattic here?
Yeah, well, I completely agree. One thing that, yeah, Ethan had mentioned is, you know, I kind of have to make sure that I am not solely focusing on everyone working remotely, right? A lot of folks had to ramp up into working remotely. So there is a shift, right? The thing at Automattic is, you know, before folks join the company, they're put through a trial, and the trial is a real project that that needs to be worked on, right? Folks are paid for it, just so they're not doing free work. And the trial process is a way to just see how folks handle working remotely, right? It helps us kind of gauge if it's a good fit, not just for Automattic, but it allows the person to also gauge if Automattic is a good fit for them. So that's one of the areas that we use to really, that we use as an indicator to determine if it's a culture fit, right?
That's interesting.
And yeah. So I think that's one of the things that maybe wasn't applied to companies, right, that work are co-located, where hiring is more just based on the body of work from past employers, maybe. Yeah, where
that's super interesting. I mean, this is sort of a side note, but just, you know, as you know, Slack is still in the hiring, like we're still hiring folks, and that has been a real challenge for both candidates as well as folks within Slack, is to feel comfortable making decisions without having actually met people in real life. It's just, you know, like we have to adapt to that during this time, because things haven't, like we're going to be, you know, Slack will be working remotely until at least the end of August. So that's a really long time. So we have to really sort of change the way we approach many of the things that we do. That's a really interesting sort of tactical approach to this, is
what's
having that
really,
trial.
And gonna kind of step back and think about my trial process. What was really unique and interesting was just how unbiased it was. You don't just start talking to folks on a Zoom call. There's no face-to-face interaction. The intention of the trial is to make it as unbiased as possible and really focus on the work and focus on how the person gets to the solution for the project. So there is Slack communication. There is communication on the internal P2 that I touched on, internal tool, called P2. And it's pretty much async in text-based. And if a person can get through that, then as we add a higher bandwidth communication, it should get easier. And, you know, we've kind of validated that, hey, this person can successfully pick up a thing and get to the end and continue going.
Yeah, and to add to that a little bit, I think at the core of it, what Ethan and Ola, like at the core of it, if you think of it thematically, the key attribute, regardless of if you're leading a remote team for the first time or distributed team, or you're jumping into it, is realizing that leading a distributed team really exposes whatever flaws existed in your process, in your leadership, or in your culture. Those become accentuated. So in this situation, you might find that you are being stretched in ways you didn't realize, because working in person sometimes can be a little bit of a camouflage, or it can mask some things that are a little bit of a stressor. And so this, I think, going back to that original question, what is going to change? I think that many companies will start to see flaws in processes, things in culture that maybe they want to adjust or fix, things in leadership. But I think it goes back to that, because with teams, learning how to address, do we need synchronous meetings, asynchronous meetings? How do we be unbiased in hiring processes? Maybe companies are really experiencing that for the first time. And I think it goes back to, what is it really like leading a remote or distributed team? One of the things is your flaws are accentuated, sometimes very publicly.
That's interesting result. I have heard this from some of my colleagues who have been transferring to the all remote collaboration really rapidly due to this change. Totally agree with you, Jessa. I would like to take another really voted question, actually combine the two questions from the audience, because I think they're really closely related. There was a question from Ivana about how do you stay motivated and creative when you work remotely? And Jenny, I think you would be one of the best persons to answer that. And another one from David, really related to that. How do you deal with the fatigue from being hyper-focused during the remote work? So how do you stay creative, and how do you deal with the fatigue?
Yeah, I can definitely help out and answer the first one, because I think working at Figma, we have like a really unique perspective and like kind of view of what's going on out in this like newly remote work as everyone transitions en masse to remote. I think what has been really cool from my perspective to see is that people are now bringing some of like these ways that they get energy from their coworkers and that they like collaborate in person into the digital world, and it's like somehow making a transition. I don't think it's like 100% the same as like just being with somebody in the same room and jamming on something, but what we have seen come out of it is just like people using Figma in like really playful and like creative ways, and I think we'd always sort of seen this where like you would jump into a file and you'd be like, hey, and your coworker would like say hello, and you draw something fun together or whatnot. But we're actually starting to see like Figma become this like this tool where people, work together, and it's like not just a canvas for UI, but it's actually a place for like emotional connection between you and your coworkers. So I think that has been fun to see. And I think it's led to people using Figma not to just like design UI with their teams, but to, use it for team activities, to like draw things together with their team when they're taking a break. Like we saw people create this like crazy like work from home town that was featured in Fast Company, just to show like, hey, like this is the community and we're all out here working from home. So I think from that perspective, it's helped us as a company view our tool not just as like this interface tool, but also as like, hey, we're becoming this place where people are gathering together to not only just be creative, but to support each other in this like really weird time that we're in.
What, kind of building on that, it's interesting that you're highlighting that like sort of the energy aspect of Figma as a productivity tool. And this is going to sound a little bit esoteric, but like at Slack, we kind of think about the same thing where, our mission is to make people's working life simple, more productive, and more pleasant. And, it's like, it's interesting when you think about that more productive and the more pleasant part. Because oftentimes when you're designing for productivity tools, the designing for like making it a pleasant experience isn't part of the equation. But as we have more and more people who are working remotely and aren't able to meet together face-to-face, human-to-human in the office, where a lot of that like aspect of culture is built within organizations, finding ways to do that through your tools becomes, I think, critically important.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just interesting to hear like that lens from Figma, because like you see that happen like, you know, sort of organically, and it's a, you know, but it's a really powerful thing when you're able to see people in real time, you know, express themselves creatively. That's I mean, that's a really fun way for creative people to connect.
Yeah, definitely. I think when I think about the product development process too, I think about like sometimes the product specs or the design specs that we'd write, and we would never, you know, write like, hey, a primary use case is for people to be able to have fun emotionally with their coworkers. But now that we are seeing this happen at such a large scale, it's sort of like maybe we should start considering some of these use cases and not just be like, yeah, this is a nice to have, because it is very important to foster those things, especially in a remote environment.
Yeah, what's usually exciting is just like the Easter egg things folks end up doing with your product, right? Like you end up building it for one thing and it turns into something completely different, which is serendipitous and fun. We actually, for Figma and Slack is something the design team uses a lot for just communicating and being inspired with work that we do daily, right? So the exact same thing you mentioned, Jenny, in terms of just jumping into a Figma and collaborating is what we tend to do, right? We have folks working on different products within Automattic. And at times there might be a really cool idea that's happening on this team and someone shares it in the design channel on Slack and a few people jump in there and then we just start remixing the work. So that's one way, right, that we try to just foster inspiration across just different teams. Another thing is just one thing that we've tried a few things since we've like been doing it since the inception of Automattic. We've tried, you know, having kind of just a creative forum where folks jump on a Zoom call and share stuff that's not related to work, right? Like, do you paint? Do you, I don't know, stuff, right? Do you do stuff outside of work? Bring it to the Zoom call where we can just talk about it and just talk. And weekly posts internally on that P2 that I mentioned a while back, where we're just sharing something cool that's happening outside of Automattic. And quickly just want to touch on fatigue. It is remote work. It is a thing, right? Burnout is real when working remotely because we flatten the org and information is accessible by everyone within the company, right? If you're using a tool like Slack or Figma or have an internal tool that you use to communicate plans, or you're using Jira, just Asana, any tool, right? So information overload can happen, right? So just, again, it all goes back to creating boundaries, knowing when to say it's enough, right? And step away. I think that's probably the biggest thing when it comes to dealing with fatigue.
Yeah, and another aspect of this is sometimes creativity does mean like intentionally stepping back. And so one of the things we do on our team is, we actually did this last Friday, is we have what's called like a creative recharge day. And you pick, every designer, researcher on the team, you pick a skill you've never done before, or maybe you want to practice. And it's amazing to see what people pick. I mean, over the course, and then you spend the entire day as a team. We open up Zoom call meetings and we, you know, order lunch to people's houses, and then you just spend the day practicing something you've never done before, kind of like as that shot in the arm of, you know, creativity. And it's really interesting to see what people come up with. You know, people on the team, some people wanted to practice, you know, teaching the AI to recognize YMCA. Other people did origamis. One person did a TikTok dance, and it was fabulous. It was amazing. Cool. And at the end of the day, we do a show and tell. And, you know, I'm on the chopping block too, but it's not a chopping block. It's more like, here's what I tried, and doesn't look great, but I had fun. And it really breaks down the wall. So sometimes maybe in addition to fostering that continuous creativity, maybe taking a step back and as a leader and saying, okay, let's take a day to actually, you know, see what works for our team, try something different. The team really loved it. We're going to continue doing those, but also small things like set up a water cooler channel and organically, you know, make sure that there's a place for your team to post non-related work stuff for that fatigue, right? To step back, because we're in a situation where people can't actually escape what's happening. It's on the news, it's on social media, you know, maybe team members are being affected. So making sure that you're creating a place where people can step back, and the expectation is, hey, no work talk. No COVID talk, right? We actually set up a channel called the Quarantine. I know, it's super.
I love
that. we post quarantine things, fun things like One day we did baby pictures, the other day we did awkward high school photos. But take the time to recognize that your team might need that, but don't push people who don't want to. I think that's part of fostering creativity, in addition to everything that, Ola, you and Jenny have mentioned.
That's some great tips over there, Jessa, for the leaders of the remote teams. I guess indeed the first thing that we need to all focus is on replacing that face-to-face, this bumping in the office into each other with something else. And those couple of practices are really good tips. Thanks for mentioning that. I would like to quickly shift back to the questions from our audience. And the next upvoted one, which got quite some votes, is coming from Rosa. And she asks, what are the tips for the designers, especially juniors, that remotely onboard to the design teams? How to do it smoothly, and how would they start collaborating with more senior designers? Anyone wants to take a jump on that?
So I think the biggest thing, it's less about junior designers and more about the senior designers and design leads and just leaders. I think it's really important when folks are onboarding during this time or into just a remote work environment to make sure there's a checklist or just a welcome package that highlights the do's and don'ts of working remotely and just provides guidance on how to slowly ramp into things. I think it's ambitious for junior designers to want to ramp up right away and just get into all the things, but that can lead to fatigue and burnout, like we just touched on. So I think it's more up to the leaders to onboard junior designers nicely, where you're slowly exposing them to all of the things within the company and slowly connecting the dots for them. And eventually, I'd say within 3 to 6 months is a long time, but you just need to onboard right. So 3 to 6 months, they should be able to work autonomously, right? Be able to connect the dots and run by themselves.
Would you give, as a leader, a bit more time to people who are onboarding remotely versus to a person who would be onboarding in a collocated office?
I mean, I'll just say that we've onboarded folks during this time, and I think in general, making sure you have a very well-considered onboarding process is incredibly important. And so but that's also something that oftentimes isn't deeply invested in by design teams. It can be an area that's overlooked. And so just in general, onboarding is the opportunity that this new person has as they enter into the organization to learn the company's culture, to understand the team's practices, to sort of get on their feet in the best way possible. And to Ola's point, it's all about then, having a good onboarding process that's structured, that helps them integrate well with the team at a reasonable pace. And so what we found is that I think that's the general, it's generally really important to have a relatively well-considered and well-invested in onboarding process. There's different dimensions of onboarding that I think are more or less challenging, whether you're in an office or whether you're remote. So the technical side of this, ramping up in projects, understanding what you're supposed to do, how design works, what tools are used, what is the process, etc. That is, I don't think it doesn't seem to me as impacted by being remote or in an office, at least within the context of Slack, where the tools that we use have been relatively transferable across the two different sort of worlds. I think the part that is a bit more sort of different is the ramping up with the team culturally. And interestingly, we've actually found that the cultural sort of ramp up has been a bit more, a bit easier during this time, during a remote working time, than when we were in the office, because again, everybody's in the same playing field. So when somebody joins the San Francisco office, it's not like the people in San Francisco are the ones who are introducing them to the team. They're joining Slack and they're joining the design team, and we're all seeing them through Slack and through Zoom. And so we've been doing some really fun things for people who just join. For example, we'll just take video with our phones and hi, welcome to the team. It's asynchronous welcome video. you get a bunch of those from different people across the team. It's a really cool way to get introduced. And that's kind of the virtual equivalent of somebody coming up to your desk after you joined and just stopping by and saying hi. But it's kind of a nice little gift to receive. And so, but it's been interesting to see how, because we're remote, because we're a bit more connected, because we have a bit more of an opportunity without the commute and that time that's spent, and because we know it's important to carve out specific time to be social and kind of step away from work. Because of those opportunities, we've started to see this sort of flourishing of cultural connections across the team that helps people who are already on the team, but also is really critical to onboarding new folks.
It's fascinating, and it seems like it has quite some benefits.
Well, I think when we go back, that will be a really interesting experience, right? So what of the best remote practices do you maintain when now you're in an office? Because it's not, it's a new world working remotely, but there's actually some really interesting benefits from it.
Yeah.
So that'll be another, really interesting conversation to have, is from all of the benefits that we gain from working remotely, how do we then bring those back into a co-located remote or working environment?
I feel like we need this whole separate panel discussion on that at the end of the week. I would like to make sure that we pick maybe 2 questions more. And one I found really interesting and a bit maybe challenging one. So Danny asks, how do you make sure that the teams are up to date and aligned with the other teams and other departments that they're working on? For example, as an individual contributor, I'm feeling more siloed and isolated since working from home situation. Any tips for that? Jenny, maybe you would like to jump in.
I don't know if I have solid tips for this. I think it's probably just making sure that as an IC, you're also checking in with your cross-functional partners. I think actually for me specifically, I have felt actually a little bit more equally connected with my cross-functional partners as the design team in this new remote world. Just because in the past, the design team, actually we're small enough of a company where the design team sits together and has a lot of interactions together, versus I think I have less interaction with my cross-functional team. So I think this comes back to just analyzing the ways that you're communicating and the meetings that you might have set up, and making sure that hey, maybe if you're spending this much time with the current team that you're working on, what about the time that you're spending with your cross-functional teams or the other teams that you're trying to be aligned with? I think that's actually maybe easier to do in this environment because everything is sort of on your calendar, all the different interactions with people are on your calendar, as opposed to more spontaneous and just by proximity. So maybe that's one thing that you could do, is just analyze your calendar, see who you're talking to. And then 2, since everything is sort of asynchronous, we no longer sort of have to create special venues to share work. You can just link out your work and share it, in Slack or whatever tools you're using, and making sure that you're doing that much more explicitly than relying on some of the old methods of meetings or share outs to do that. Right. I think that's a really good point. Ola, maybe you have some tips and best practices from Automattic, how to deal with that.
Yeah. So that is a really interesting one. We touched on it a little bit earlier, just isolation. But the best solution that I personally use when it comes to working remotely, don't want to speak for other folks at Automattic, is pretty much what Jenny mentioned, right? With remote working, it's flat. So you don't need to have squads, right? You don't need to go sit with the design team. You can jump into a channel. You can create a channel on Slack and pull in all partners and share things and collaborate async or synchronously and just figure out the solution. We're all working on the same thing. So with remote working, to combat that feeling of isolation, feeling that, to make sure everyone's aligned, I think it just requires one person on the team to say, hey, I feel like we're not aligning or communicating well. Let's jump into a Slack channel. This channel is to talk about the work we need to get done. That's pretty much it. It comes down to just communication and just being proactive and figuring out where those failure points are and how to improve those areas so you can keep moving.
Right, thanks a lot. I think that's important, just to make sure that you are yourself, not identifying yourself also those times when you feel like you're becoming isolated, maybe making additional effort to go out of that zone and to reach out to people who you work with. Thanks a lot for those tips.
I quickly just want to highlight the one really interesting thing is, folks tend to, right now we're having, like, the conversation is a bit about, how does leadership help create process and structure? I think one really unique thing about remote working and how we're kind of, again, flattening the org is a good idea can come from anywhere, right? So it really just requires one person. You can be junior, senior, whatever. If you feel like there's misalignment happening, just this is where the opportunity to show, hey, I'm working and I want to make sure we're all aligned could come in, right? And it just takes one person to say, hey, let's get together and figure it out again in a channel.
Indeed, that's actually, thanks for that, Ola. I think that's a really positive note to maybe finish this panel. Unfortunately, for me, the time flew crazy fast. I've wanted to ask some more questions from the attendees. Sorry for those who have not been raised. But I think to summarize this, it sounds like remote work helps people open up some more diverse solutions, better communications, people feeling more equal in different parts. I don't know if anyone wants to add something, maybe really positive, real quick, that you have found with having this new experience.
Let's see, we talked about having that creative sort of like outlet. Without remote work, you don't have a commute. That means like you may have a bit more time. It's also important, as Ola mentioned, to like disconnect from doing your work and figure out the time and space that you have to do things that make you happy outside of work. I would assume most people who are watching us right now are creative by nature. Now is the time if you wanted to explore that like side of you that you didn't have time before to like really lean into. And so I would just sort of encourage you to, start working with your hands again and step away from the screen a bit more and, take this time as an opportunity to do that.
Thanks for that, Ethan. All right, I would like to say a big thank you for everyone who participated in this discussion. I personally enjoyed a lot. I think I learned a lot myself. I've been experiencing the all remote work for quite some time. I encourage everyone to reach out to speakers in Slack. There is a speakers Q&A question, and to each other as well. We have a lot of people and all of knowledge present today in the conference, so do reach out to each other, do talk to yourself, because these are also what conferences are for. Thank you a lot. Preet, are you back?
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Nadia, that was amazing. Again, echoing Nadia, big thank you to all the panelists for taking out the time, to participate in the event and in the panel discussion. I think we shared this thought yesterday as well, that this is, first of all, participating in an event and a conference is already a commitment. You need to kind of prepare your thoughts, whether it be a panel discussion or a talk, prepare your mindset. And then with everything going outside our work lives, there's a lot of unseen stress and a lot of things on your mind that generally we all are dealing with. So I really appreciate all the speakers, all the panelists that still are able to bring their whole selves and contribute to the community. So really appreciate that. And Nadia, thank you for moderating the panel. That was amazing.
It was a pleasure.